Native Land Pod is a production of iHeartRadio in partnership with Reason Choice Media.
Welcome.
Hello, Native Land Pod family. My name is Annie DeResto. I am reaching out because I wanted to hear your thoughts around Fearless Fund. As you know, the U.S. Appeals Court has blocked them from being able to provide grants to Black female entrepreneurs. I am part of the DEI movement in the sense that I'm a co-founder of Black in Jewelry Coalition, where we promote the advancement of Black professionals. And so we were created 3 years ago, and we provide grants to support Black professionals in the jewelry industry. There are many organizations similar to us that are about DEI, whether it's through schools or organizations. So this Fearless Fund issue is more than the Fearless Fund. I think it affects many of us. And I wanted to, one, hear your thoughts on what's going on with this. And the other piece is realize that not enough people are having a conversation about this. I don't think people realize how much this affects all of us as a community and what we're going to do about it. So would love to have some dialogue around this from your podcast because I always love to hear your input. Thank you.
Well, welcome home, everybody. This is our favorite time. It's a MiniPod. I am, of course, Angela Rye. I'm with Tiffany Cross and Andrew Gillum, my co-hosts. And this is Native Land Pod, and we are excited to be with you all. Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Today, we are talking about something that is near and dear to all of our hearts, but it is something that is terrorizing me. We have been talking about being tormentors of racists, but I feel tormented by the number of lawsuits that are coming out opposing at every turn Black progress. So there are two cases that I really wanted to talk about today. One is a lawsuit against Evanston, Illinois, that was brought by Judicial Watch on behalf of 6 people who have relatives that once lived in Evanston. And they, Judicial Watch's president, Tom Fitton, says that Evanston's program is just a proxy for giving out money to people based on race. For those of you who do not know, Evanston, Illinois is one of the first in the nation to develop a government-funded reparations program for Black folks. The program paid out nearly $5 million to 193 of Evanston's Black residents over the past 2 years. But Judicial Watch is saying that the program must die because it discriminates against non-Black people in Evanston. Additionally, we are familiar with the terrorist Ed Blum, who runs an organization called the American Alliance for Equal Rights. It wasn't enough for conservative folks to say, hey, we don't want municipalities, states, or the feds to be paying y'all reparations. We actually also want to go after programs that y'all start for yourselves. So Fearless Fund is on the receiving end of this attack from the likes of Ed Blum. And what I want to do is show how Arian Simone Reed, who runs the Fearless Fund, came out with a challenge to the Biden administration and to Congress to respond to Ed Blum's antics. Let's roll the clip.
Arian Simone, we had such a quick segment that you had one other point you wanted to make. Please make it.
Yes, I would like to send a signal to the President of the United States of America. We need the administration to say and do an executive order, some type of executive action that is on DEI. Right now, it is obvious that we need the administration to say something. It is an election year. We are counting on you to speak on behalf of the Black community. Thank you much.
So Arian is saying we need the Biden administration to issue an executive order. For full disclosure, Tiff and Andrew, I have been speaking with Arian and others, trying to make sure that we are working to support what the Fearless Fund represents. This case cannot go to the Supreme Court. That would have disastrous impact, not just on the Fearless Fund, but the Supreme Court would use this, and
They'll
corporations
overreach.
and other entities would use it just like they did with the Harvard case. All of a sudden, it was Harvard admissions and affirmative action. Then it became, and actually, we're going to shut down DEI programs everywhere. So imagine what that does to not-for-profit entities. The Fearless Fund is a nonprofit that gives $20,000 grants to Black women in business because we don't see venture capital. We are not on the receiving end of those resources. So that is why they stood that up, to meet a need. It is a very clear intent. I believe it's clearly constitutional. But again, as we talked about on our recent podcast, we know that the Supreme Court isn't just ruling on the constitutionality of a thing. They're ruling on whether or not they like you, if they support the interest of the thing, and who is the highest paid payer. And of course, I just can't even imagine what the Fearless Fund is encountering in terms of legal fees and what they would encounter if this is allowed to continue. So yes, there needs to be legislation to establish and to protect DEI efforts throughout the country. And there absolutely should be an executive order looking at the disparities that exist in venture, in philanthropy, in wages, in access to boardrooms, all of that, to prove that we need the programs that are in place to protect our interests and to level the playing field.
I mean, but has there not been enough research done to show the disparate impact and investing? How many Black women-owned companies that exist and compete for venture capitalist dollars by comparison to white male-led VC interests, and how oftentimes, actually, it's well recorded, how most consistently, it's Black women-owned companies that get the shortest end of that stick, even though they have like the highest rate of success of any across all race, gender groupings. And I'll try to find that research while we're sitting here so I can bring it up more definitively. But I think anywhere you look, and almost across any platform, you can see the disparate impact: investment, banking, leveraging through lending, so on and so forth, and the impact that it has on Black women-run businesses. I think we're being set back on our back heel here, when at one point, folks on the left, progressive groups, actually negotiated the upper hand by taking to the courts many of these issues that won us the kind of victories that we've had, that have been the status quo sort of modus operandi for most of these institutions for the past 30, 40 years. And then I think what happened, Tiff and Angela, is this Federalist Society reared set of judges who have made their way not just through the local benches in the appellate courts, but into the federal benches and onto the federal court. I think Amy Coney Barrett is one of the yielded examples of it, where these justices have now become so philosophically ensconced that it isn't about, as you talked about before when we spoke about judges, strict conservatism or strict construction of the law, strict construction of the law, but rather which position I ideologically agree with and which one I ideologically don't agree with. And we all ought to know, we don't put judges there for ideological issues that they agree and don't agree with. They're supposed to be there to interpret the law when it was put into law. What were the operating modes of operandi of those who put it, who move these pieces of legislation along? And instead, what it's yielding is very philosophical bends that come down to whether or not you are appointed by a left or a right judge, a president, and whether you're a left or right justice. And to me, that it is the beginning steps of, I think, the destruction of the federal system.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Angela. Did I interrupt you?
No.
I just wanted to say to Andrew's point about venture capitalism, I wrote about this in my book, and I've cited it on this show before, so forgive me for being redundant, but in 2017, venture capitalists had reached a boom, investment over $80 million. This was a height not seen since the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s. This was a big deal. And an analysis was done by Rate My Investor, which analyzed whatever public information was available for venture-backed deals over a 5-year period. I want to tell you all, of the funds that a majority went to college-educated white men founders. Out of nearly 10,000 founders, only 9% of founders were women. 17% Asian American, 2.4% is Middle Eastern, 1.9% is Latino, just 1% identified as Black. On the funding side, the same study found that white men make up more than 90% of venture capitalists. What Arian Simone is doing is not even trying to level the playing field. It is just give us a fighting chance. And I have to say, you guys, I'm increasingly exhausted with it. As we're recording this, it just crossed the wires. Our brother, Roland Martin, just sent this to us. The Oklahoma Supreme Court has struck down the case to award the Tulsa survivors any kind of reparations. They dismissed the Tulsa massacre lawsuit. And it just feels like we keep fighting these same battles. And I don't know what comes next, but I think we're increasingly getting exhausted with asking politely to give us a fair chance, to asking directly, give us a fair chance, to demanding to give us a fair chance. And it's like America, the system won't bend. And we all know what happens to things that don't bend.
Well, you know what? Maybe it is time to break, right? Yeah, maybe it is really time to level the whole system. Because, I mean, I think all of us listened to the oral arguments on Tulsa. You had the two of the remaining survivors, both now, in excess of 100 years old. Yeah. Who were ably represented, and you all have to name check me on your colleague who is the attorney who
Demario
argued.
Solomon Simmons, an amazing brother. Demario Solomon Simmons, we're thinking of you and thank you for your fight.
Yeah, indeed. And quite frankly, what an incredible attorney you are. Listened to you before the court and was just overwhelmingly impressed. I just don't know how you make those arguments any more convincingly than were made there. How you example it any better. You're talking about a community that was thriving one day and then the events of another day, which can be clearly correlated, then takes that community off of its thriving thrust into disrepair, destruction at the hands of its white residents. And the Chamber of Commerce and the local government and every other institution that existed at the time and then theretofore did nothing to heal what was, a theft. A great theft, destruction and a theft. And the fact that the court could see no reason to go back and see those harms redressed. And I don't know what argument, because we're just hearing this, Tiff, from what you said, from what you're sharing here. I can't wait to go back and read whatever justification they put on paper. But there is no justification to be put on paper. There isn't anything that can justify that the harm was done there in the absence of a repair. No repair whatsoever.
This kind of gets back to this point about Evanston. Evanston is a reparations case, right? Involving these citizens who were harmed by the community. $25,000 per resident is all we're talking about. $5 million cost to the city is all we're talking about. And it wouldn't have been that expensive for Tulsa to repair the damage of that community. One and the same, going back to Arian Simone Reed and what she's pushing for with Fearless Fund and the idea of a commission. There was a Kerner Commission stood up. The Kerner Commission was stood up by Lyndon B. Johnson in 1967. Otto Kerner, who was the governor of Illinois, chaired the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. Let me just remind you all what the questions were asking. It was in response to 23 uprisings in cities throughout the country. And the conclusion of the commission was that the triggers for civil unrest were discrimination in policing practices, the justice system, consumer credit practices, inadequate housing and public assistance programs, high unemployment, and the exclusion of communities of color from the democratic process. This was 57 years ago. Here we are today in 2024, needing a redo of the Kerner Commission.
That's right.
Needing them to tell us why the Tulsa survivors, who are almost 110 years old, right, why they are not going to see justice 100 plus years later. Why a city that has proven that its residents deserve reparations don't deserve those reparations? Why, when we go and do it ourselves, are we still found to be breaking the law in some way, just for, not even for trying to get ahead, for just trying to see over the fence the same way that you do? Like, that's the thing to me. And so we really have to evaluate what recourse we have. I think that we are in the season around the election where, you all know, I believe in demands. I believe that we have to make our demands known, not just our asks, but our requirements. It is not a heavy lift for President Biden to ensure that there's an executive order on the table when we couldn't get the George Floyd Justice and Policing bill passed. It is not a heavy lift to ask President Biden to sign an executive order establishing a commission when we can't get H.R. 40 looked at, to give Evanston, Illinois, and other cities that were pursuing similar paths, including San Francisco, some cover when people don't want to pay their debt. Like, and the city and the state and the feds to pay their debt. We literally have been having podcast after podcast when we're talking about what a waste of resources by DOJ to pursue someone's application, someone who lied on an application or misspoke on an application, but you can't ensure that our community receives justice?
No,
that silent. Is absolutely ours? Like, silent. I'm beyond. And I'm just saying that this administration has the ability to review, to look over, to study, since apparently, Andrew, it's not enough studies. Not enough money has been spent on this. There couldn't be another Pew poll done on the disparities that exist. Couldn't be more, folks in corporate talking about the wage gap. There couldn't be more, we know how many lawsuits Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and others have had to settle because of housing discrimination. Yeah. But apparently more studies need to be done. You know, H.R. 40 is merely a study bill, right? It establishes a commission to do this same thing. So because we have to prove our trauma, because we have to prove our injustice, because we have to prove our discrimination when we're on the receiving end of it. If that's not victim blaming, I don't know what is.
Come on.
I really don't know what I just anyway.
Even to the point of Evanston,
the victim has to develop its solution.
And with Evanston, I think when you read through the policy and how Black people were impacted and how it spiraled through generations, even for those who were able to, by some miracle, acquire property in mostly white neighborhoods, they were terrorized. They had crosses burned in their lawns. There was actually a case of kidnappings and potential torture and human experiment with Black people that dated back to the 60s. A series that I watch every summer since it's come out is Lovecraft Country. Did you guys watch that?
Loved it.
Oh my God.
Loved it.
It is like the most amazing series. So I've given them free advertising.
That piece they did on Tulsa.
The
last couple episodes on Chicago. Just incredible.
I think sometimes to connect younger generations with the atrocities that were faced, the dramatization of it in a scripted series helps bring it to life. So it wasn't a documentary, it was a scripted series, but it was just an amazing, really well done series that highlighted what people went through. Pioneering is hard. And so even the folks who did acquire property, what they went through was horrific. We wouldn't stand for it today, but we're still impacted by it today. So I share your outrage.
And Tiffany, it is really, and those examples are almost anywhere America at that time when Black families were making their migration into differing neighborhoods where we were not welcome, we're not wanted. In fact, we were the object of rejection in every way, shape, and form that it could take. And I know we're wrapping here, but I would say my ask would be not just to the administration, but to the legislative branch, where Democrats have been able to wield power. There's been a tossing back and forth between the left and the right, almost every other election between who controls the House and the Senate. When we are in control again of the House of Representatives and the Senate, don't wait until you got a 2/3 majority before you move on issues and interests that affect us. I want to see them take some leadership, pass some legislation, and at the local level, require your own local governments to institute their own disparity studies so that we can have some legs to stand on. And if they want to take Evanston out, then you're going to have to take Tallahassee and Miami and you name the city out right along with it. Force the federal government to have to then weigh in because of how ubiquitous these studies then become, looking at each and every community in each and every state across the entire country. We ought to make them do some of the work here. If they want to dismantle it, you got to come at us one by one by one by one by one. And every local community has the ability to institute their own disparate studies across a range of private sector and public sector impacts as it relates to race and gender.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know. I just feel like whatever we need to do to gear up for the fight, y'all, we are in the fight of our lives. I mean, it's one that's, expanded and extended beyond generations, across generations, Tiff. Like, we are still in the fight, and it's so devastating to witness that it just doesn't feel like it's getting lighter.
And thank you for your work, Angela. Like you said, we were between taking a break, and I asked Angela what was her involvement, and I don't want to mess up your words, but it was something to the effect, when Black folks call upon me to help, that I answer that call. So just thank you.
So joins.
Yeah.
I try to. I appreciate y'all. Thank you for always carving out space for these important topics. I just am hoping that soon we can report on our victory. Like, we deserve our victory from losing what the mission is of the Minority Business Development Agency is to, the really important work that affirmative action policy has done in this country, even though we know it needed work, to lose it, to watch DEI department after DEI department and position get completely eviscerated. It's just really hard to continue to bear witness to this and not be discouraged. So thank you all for carving out space, and hopefully we can think through some additional calls to action. But I think for now, we are supposed to be putting up a letter. We hopefully will have that done by the time this MiniPod runs, asking President Biden to sign an executive order to develop and establish a commission that would look at the disparate experiences, impact, and probably in many ways intention on the experiences of Black folks in this country. It's time to revisit what the Kerner Commission was evaluating. It may not be an uprising where things are happening in community, but there's certainly an uprising in our souls, and it needs to be addressed.
That's right.
And we are feeling the pinch of it economically, educationally, and psychologically, and that needs to be evaluated, and there should be some recourse. So thank you all so much. Welcome home, everybody.
Welcome home.
Thank you all so much for listening. Remember to rate, review, subscribe, and tune in to our regular episode on Thursday. Welcome home.
Native Land Pod is a production of iHeartRadio in partnership with Reason Choice Media. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.